Mr. Speaker, today's rule provides for the consideration of two bills. The first piece of legislation, H.R. 3017, is a bipartisan compromise to extend the EPA's Brownfields program. The successful Brownfields program assists communities across this country in cleaning up contaminated sites to reduce pollution and health risks and spur economic development. Although funding for this program has enjoyed broad support over the years, its authorization lapsed in 2006, 11 years ago. It is certainly long past time for this important program to be reauthorized, and I appreciate the work of Republicans and Democrats on both the Energy and Commerce and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees in coming together to produce this legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is how the process is supposed to work. There was a hearing and there was a markup. Now, I should say, for the record, the majority could have issued an open rule instead of a closed rule, but I'm not even going to criticize that today, Mr. Speaker, because experts on this issue came together to negotiate in a bipartisan manner, and the result is a good piece of legislation, which I look forward to voting for later this week. I want to commend Mr. McKinley and Mr. Tonko, Mr. Pallone, and all those who work together. And I just want to say, for the record, as one who routinely gets up here and criticizes the majority for issuing closed rules and structured rules all the time, I do so not just as a knee-jerk reaction to what they produce in the Rules Committee. I do it because usually they do closed rules and structured rules to basically stifle a deliberative process. They do so to shut off debate and to shut out other people's opinions. And quite frankly, the majority's records on rules is abysmal. But in this case, what we are doing is bringing forward something that represents a bipartisan process. And I just wish this wasn't an anomaly. I wish that the majority would understand that in the House of Representatives, the views of Democrats are just as important as the views of Republicans. And that if you want to get things done, you need to come together in the spirit of compromise and work together for the good of the American people, not just for the good of one political party, not just so you can issue a press release, not just so you can play gotcha games, but actually to produce things that are meaningful. If the Republican leadership would drop their all-or-nothing approach to governing more often, support genuine bipartisan negotiations and compromise, and open up the process on all pieces of legislation, both minor and substantial, we might be able to get something done around here. Maybe we'd have more than 12 bills of any sort of real significance signed into law in a year. Mr. Speaker, this rule also brings to the floor legislation, I'm sad to say, that would do irreparable harm to our federally protected land by allowing a foreign company the ability to use a half-century-old lease to mine next door to the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness. H.R. 3905 would allow a Chilean mining company, which is facing tens of millions of dollars in fines from the Chilean government for their failure to protect nearby water resources, the ability to mine just upstream of pristine U.S. protected land. This is all based on a 50-year-old lease, a lease that didn't go through any environmental review because NEPA didn't exist yet. There are members of this chamber who weren't even born when this lease was signed. My colleagues in the majority will claim that this bill will help create jobs. But what about the 22,000 jobs that the local protected land already supports? What will happen to those jobs when the water is so polluted that no one can visit the recreational area around the mine? The truth is, this isn't about jobs. It's about helping a few rich owners of mining companies line their pockets at the expense of the environment. In fact, the recipient of this Republican handout is a subsidiary of a Chilean company, Antofagasta, which is controlled by Chilean billionaire Andronico Luksic. And get this, Mr. Luksic just happens to be the landlord of Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, President Trump's daughter and son-in-law, and senior advisors to the Trump White House. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. This is part of a pattern of sketchy deals and questionable business contacts involving the president, his family, and their closest advisors. Earlier this month, we learned that President Trump and his family made millions through a hotel in Panama financed by Colombian drug cartels and the Russian mafia. We still don't even know how these new deals will boost President Trump's income or how his family profits off of the presidency, because we're 312 days into his presidency and we still haven't seen his tax returns. I mean, imagine if this were Hillary Clinton. Imagine if this were Barack Obama. Imagine the screams on the other side of the aisle demanding transparency and an open process. But when it comes to covering up all these sketchy deals on behalf of this President of the United States, it's silence. President Trump promised to drain the swamp, but instead he's created a cesspool. There are so many conflicts of interest, this administration is on a collision course with corruption. And Mr. Speaker, we have only 6 legislative days left before the government runs out of money. But the Speaker of the House thinks another corporate handout, this time to Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump's landlord, is the most pressing issue that needs to be resolved in Congress this week. If the Speaker wants some suggestions as things we ought to focus on this week, I know Democrats in this chamber have a few. I'm going to give you an example. Democrats think we should be debating a funding bill to avert the coming shutdown on December 8th, when the temporary spending bill expires. Democrats want to debate and pass the DREAM Act, ending the turmoil this president has caused by upending the lives of 800,000 young immigrant dreamers and their families. Democrats want to extend the Children's Health Insurance Program, known as CHIP, and community health centers whose authorizations expired 2 months ago. Democrats think we ought to debate flood insurance reauthorization, which expires on December 8th. Democrats want to pass additional hurricane relief to help those who are still recovering from devastating hurricanes in Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. Democrats want to address funding for the Vets' Choice Program, which is set to run out of money before the end of the year. But instead, here we are, considering yet another ridiculous extreme anti-environment bill. Mr. Speaker, my friends on the other side of the aisle love talking about returning this country to the way it used to be. I've seen them Make America Great Again stickers on many of their cars. I can think of no pastime more important, more significant to our national heritage and identity than our wilderness and protected areas. My friends and colleagues who have spent time in the boundary waters tell me how stunning it is. They say it's one of the most beautiful places in our country. And we're going to risk polluting this national treasure with copper sulfate acid drainage running into the streams that feed the boundary waters? Worse yet, this bill makes these mining leases impossible to overturn, ever, even should the Bureau of Land Management conclude its environment assessment and rule against further mining in this protected national forest. This is a slippery slope. If we continue to allow corporations to pillage our federally protected wilderness areas, then we're opening the door to irreversible damage. What's next? Clear cutting in Yellowstone Forest? Oil drilling off the coast of Acadia National Park? Mr. Speaker, I beg my Republican friends to drop this assault on our public lands and urge the leadership of this House to bring up the urgent bills and priorities that we need to deal with before adjourning in less than 3 weeks' time. So I'm going to urge my colleagues to oppose this rule and to oppose efforts that will further degrade our natural resources, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from